Hi, I'm Beatrice Trent. And 10 seconds ago, I found out I no longer exist. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not in the family that once called me theirs. They erased me. Not with fire, not with fists. But with a pen. And this is the moment I realized I was no longer in the picture. It wasn't just the way the frame caught the morning light, it was the space where my face should have been. I stood frozen in front of the family portrait wall at the country club, watching the reflection of other people's legacies glitter against the polished glass. It wasn't just the way the frame caught the morning light, it was the space where my face should have been. The gold plaques under each portrait sparkled like little medals for good behavior. Geneva Slate. Calden Reese. Slate lineage, decade after decade. There was no space left for me. Not even a placeholder. No trace of the child they once called their daughter. Strange, my aunt murmured behind me, clutching her champagne flute. Weren't you supposed to be in this picture? I didn't turn. I didn't flinch. Just breathed in the soft scent of lemon oil and old secrets. My name wasn't just missing, I whispered to myself. It was surgically removed. Outside, the air pressed against me like glass. I stepped away from the crowd, away from their eyes, their champagne, their lies, until I reached the garden courtyard. The silence wrapped around me like a cold scarf. That's when my phone buzzed. Notification: Geneva Slate has updated the family archive. I tapped the link, more out of reflex than curiosity. The page loaded, names cascading down like a perfectly pruned family tree. My name wasn't there. Birth, redacted. Legal guardianship, reassigned. Trust assets, dissolved. Maris Trent, officially replaced with none. I wasn't a footnote. I was an omission. Deliberate. Legal. Unmistakable. I remember standing there, the wind teasing the hem of my coat, my breath caught in my throat. My legs felt cold. Not from the weather, but from the recognition, this wasn't an accident. This was strategy. 8 years ago, I'd tried logging into our family's tax records. The site returned an error, no account found under this social security number. I called Geneva that night. She laughed, told me it was a glitch. These systems don't recognize women who leave, she said flippantly. I remember thinking it was cruelly poetic. I didn't know then, I muttered, that they were already preparing to erase me. That night, I remembered my grandmother's voice more clearly than I had in years. They can't take who you are, she told me once, while we sat folding linens in the attic. Only what you let them write about you. And right now, they were writing my absence into history. I drove home without music. Just the sound of my breathing and the engine. The mansion rose in the distance like a secret I had rebuilt, brick by brick. The one place they hadn't reached. Not yet. I walked into the house and straight to the television. The Slate Family Anniversary Gala was live streaming. Of course it was. Geneva stood at the podium, wearing a pearl-stitched suit I'd seen in a Neiman Marcus catalog. Her voice was syrup and ice. I've given everything, she said, smiling toward the camera, to raise a family built on legacy and love. Everything. The host called Calden, the future of our family, and presented a slide labeled, Slate Legacy Tree, updated. I stared at the screen. I wasn't there. The ache that settled in my chest wasn't surprise, it was confirmation. They hadn't just moved on. They'd made a declaration. I whispered, I'm not angry. Anger, after all, belongs to people who still expect fairness. I'm done expecting anything. I opened my digital birth certificate. Where my name used to be, it now read. Legally annulled for administrative simplification. Filed by, Geneva Slate. The back of my neck burned. My fingers curled against the armrest. My nails dug into my palm until the sting snapped me back into my body. Midnight passed. I wandered through my home in a sleep I hadn't earned. My hand grazed the carved banister I'd restored with my own tools, my own time, my own labor. They took my name off the wall, I murmured. But they'll never take it from the foundation. The doorbell rang. At first, I thought I imagined it. I walked slowly to the door, heartbeat heavy in my ears. When I opened it, no one. But at my feet, a package. White ribbon. Gold embossed envelope. My name written in calligraphy that didn't belong to anyone I trusted. I carried it inside with the reverence one gives a ticking bomb. Unwrapped it. Sender, Geneva Slate. Inside, a notarized document. Title, Transfer of Power of Attorney, property authorization pending signature. I didn't sign it. I never signed it. But someone had. The paper felt heavier than it should. The ink gleamed under my kitchen light, still crisp, the notary seal pressed neatly into the corner. My name curved across the bottom in handwriting that looked close enough to fool anyone who didn't know the tremor of my real signature. I traced the false flourish with one finger and whispered, "They didn't ask. They just assumed I'd stay silent." I folded the paper, not to hide it but to hold it still. The house around me was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady rain outside. The world kept moving, soft and indifferent. I stared at the page until the letters blurred, trying to decide if this was cruelty or calculation. It didn't matter. Both carried the same cold weight. My phone rang. Geneva's name lit the screen. For a moment I watched it glow, then I answered. "I'm glad you got the envelope," she said. Her voice was syrupy, practiced warmth layered over nerves. "We need to act fast. Calden's situation is delicate." "What situation?" I asked. "Oh, nothing you need to stress about," she replied too quickly. "Just sign, sweetheart. It's a chance to rejoin the family, to help your brother. After all, we're talking about blood." I let the silence stretch. She hated silence, it made her fill it with guilt. "You didn't even ask if I wanted that," I said finally. She laughed lightly, the kind of laugh people use when they think they still have control. "Don't be dramatic, Beatrice. This isn't about what you want. It's about what's right." "What's right for whom?" I asked. "For us," she said. The line went dead a second later. I stood there for a while, phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended, listening to the rain on the windows. The conversation replayed in my head, each word slipping under my skin. They had done this before, made their needs sound like duties, their deceit sound like love. Years ago, Geneva would slide documents across the table at breakfast, next to a cup of coffee and a slice of toast. "Sign this quickly, sweetie. It's just paperwork." I signed without reading. College loans, insurance updates, a trust amendment, small things that stacked into something large enough to swallow me. I was trained to obey without question. Legalized obedience, disguised as respect. I still remember the way she smiled when I signed. "Good girl," she would say. It had sounded like praise then. Now it echoed like a verdict. I picked up the forged document again. The notary seal caught my eye. The name seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. I called Della Monroe, my cousin, who worked at a notary office downtown. "Hey," I said, trying to sound steady. "Can you check a name for me?" "Patricia Cole." Della clicked her keyboard. The pause stretched. That license was revoked 3 years ago. She's dead." My stomach tightened. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Della said softly. What's going on?" I exhaled slowly. "They used a dead license to bring me back to life, just long enough to bury me under debt." Thunder rolled outside, low and slow. I hung up and walked through the house, fingers brushing the walls I'd painted myself. The scent of rain leaked through the open window. My home had always felt like proof that I'd survived without them. Now it was collateral and a lie I never agreed to. I stopped by the fireplace, pressing my palm against the rough stone I had restored. My grandmother used to stand here, warming her hands while she told stories about starting over. "Fire purifies," she'd say. "It doesn't ask permission to keep burning." I whispered to the empty room, "They erased me from the bloodline, now they want to use my hands to rescue their heir." The next morning, a knock came at the office door. I wasn't expecting anyone. A man in a gray suit stood there, polite smile, rain on his shoulders. "Delivery for Miss Trent," he said. "I didn't order anything." "It's from Mr. Calden Reese," he replied, setting a sealed folder on my desk. By the time I looked up, he was gone. I opened it carefully. A bank letterhead gleamed at the top, bold and final. Loan amount, $1 million. Collateral, 14, Maple Avenue. Authorized by Beatrice Trent, POA on file. The air went thin. I read it twice, then again. There it was, my forged signature, my house pledged as security for my brother's debt. The ink wasn't even dry. I sat down, the chair creaking under me. My pulse slowed until I could hear it in my ears, heavy and deliberate. They hadn't asked for help. They'd already taken it. I imagined Geneva's calm smile, the way she'd phrase it when I called, "Oh, sweetheart, you're overreacting. It's just temporary." I could almost hear her voice smoothing over the edges of crime with maternal polish. The rain outside turned to a downpour. I pressed my hands together and whispered to no one, "They think I'm still the girl who signs and stays quiet." I wasn't sure if I was promising or warning, but either way, it settled inside me like steel cooling in fire. I looked around my office, folders, contracts, blueprints, the framed degree I earned without their help. Every piece of paper here bore my real name, written in my real hand. It struck me how fragile proof could be, how easily it could be rewritten. But I was done letting them hold the pen. Slowly, quietly, I gathered the forged papers into a new folder marked Evidence. I placed it on the top shelf, next to the file labeled Trent Restoration. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone vibrated again. A text from an unknown number. "We'll handle this, B. Don't make things worse." I typed one reply, "I'm not the one making them worse." The rain eased, leaving the air sharp and clean. I leaned against the window frame, watching the clouds drift apart. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity: they had already collected everything they could take. The only thing left to give them was a warning. But warnings mean nothing to people who mistake silence for surrender. I stood in the library, the air thick with the smell of cedar and dust. My grandmother's cabinet sat against the far wall, its lock untouched for years. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. Maybe part of me knew that inside waited something heavier than memories. The key was still where she hid it, taped behind a loose panel on the second shelf. My fingers hesitated before prying it free. The metal felt cold, almost alive. When I turned it, the lock clicked softly, as though the cabinet had been holding its breath all this time. Inside was a stack of linen-wrapped boxes, a few family photos, and one sealed envelope marked in her looping handwriting, "To Beatrice." Only her. My pulse slowed, steady and deep. I slid the envelope open carefully, afraid that one careless move might shatter what was left of her trust. Inside lay the original copy of her will, the paper yellowed at the edges but intact. My name appeared at the top, not as a footnote, not as a conditional clause, but as the sole heir to her house. A sticky note clung to the bottom in faded ink, "I trust you'll know when the time is right." I sat down hard, the letter trembling in my hands. The time was now, Grandma. It had always been now. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The fireplace crackled quietly. Outside, rain tapped against the windows again, persistent, as if reminding me how long I had ignored this truth. 10 years earlier flashed back in perfect clarity, the night she told me about the will. She'd poured chamomile tea into those chipped blue cups and said, "I built this house for whoever remembers what family should mean. That's you, Beatrice." A week later, she was gone. Geneva told me over the phone, her voice cold and rehearsed. "Your grandmother changed her mind. She wanted it for the family, not just one person." I believed her because that's what daughters are taught to do, believe, even when the words scrape like sandpaper. I told myself maybe Grandma had decided fairness was better than faith. But as I looked at the real will now, I realized they hadn't just hidden a document, they had buried a woman's last truth. The words blurred through my tears. Betrayal doesn't roar, it whispers in familiar voices. I called Della Monroe the next morning, the cousin who'd always hovered between loyalty and convenience. She answered on the second ring, voice tight. "B, I was going to call you." "No, you weren't," I said quietly. "You notarized something for my mother 10 years ago. What was it?" Silence hummed through the line. "Della," I pressed. "I have Grandma's original will. You notarized a fake, didn't you?" Her voice cracked. "Geneva said it was just an update. She told me it was what Mavis wanted." "And you believed her?" I asked. "She's my aunt," she whispered. "She's my mother," I replied, "and I don't believe her anymore." Della started crying softly. I didn't comfort her. Some tears belong to the people who earned them. When I hung up, the morning light had turned pale and thin. I walked through the house slowly, touching each surface as though to confirm its existence. The hallway smelled faintly of the lemon polish I used last week. In the kitchen, sunlight caught the curve of the old brass faucet I restored myself. "This place wasn't just left to me," I said aloud. "It was built by me. Every inch they ignored, I resurrected." I stepped into the garden. The soil still held the grooves of my hands from planting the hydrangeas last spring. Geneva had mocked me once for getting dirt under my nails, saying, "You'll never look like someone who belongs to this family." Maybe that was the point. I didn't look like them because I was the only one who hadn't learned to hide behind polished lies. Back inside, I searched the rest of the cabinet. Beneath a box of old photographs, I found a newspaper clipping framed in brittle glass. The headline made my stomach tighten. Geneva Slate announces family trust led by son Calden. The date, 2 months after Mavis's funeral. I traced the edge of the frame, the paper stiff and yellow. Calden's smiling face stared back at me from beneath the bold text, his arm draped casually around our mother's shoulders. Geneva's expression was triumphant, serene, the portrait of a woman who had rewritten her own story and believed no one would ever question the edits. They didn't wait to mourn. They waited to profit. The betrayal wasn't a wound anymore, it was a blueprint. They had planned every line, every lie, every transfer. I sat by the window again, watching the rain carve lines down the glass. Each drop seemed to echo the years I had lost to their manipulation. Quietly, slowly, gently, I began to understand something that hurt more than anger could. I was never supposed to have this inheritance. I was meant to be the ghost who restored their legacy without claiming it. The house groaned as the wind shifted outside, as if agreeing. I picked up the will again and pressed my thumb against my grandmother's signature. "You trusted me," I whispered. "I won't let them erase you too." I imagined confronting Geneva, the way she'd lift her chin and smile with that polite cruelty. She would say things like, "Don't be ungrateful, Beatrice. Everything I've done was for you." She would call it sacrifice, I would call it theft. My hands shook as I folded the paper back into the envelope. The fury that rose inside me was quiet but absolute, a still kind of fire. I realized then that I wasn't mourning anymore. I was preparing. I went to the desk drawer and pulled out the forged power of attorney they'd sent me. I placed it beside the real will. 2 signatures. 2 stories. 1 truth. The difference between survival and surrender was about to come down to handwriting. Evening fell softly, shadows stretching long across the library floor. I felt my grandmother's presence everywhere, the faint scent of her lavender soap, the memory of her laugh echoing through the halls. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant standing up with the memory still in your hands. When I turned off the light, the envelope glowed faintly under the last strip of daylight. I slid it into the safe behind the bookshelf, locked it, and whispered, "You rest now, Grandma. I'll take care of the rest." For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. I felt like someone reclaiming what was stolen, not just the house, but the truth of who built it. Tomorrow, I would confront them. I was no longer asking for answers. I was preparing consequences. I sat with the engine running for almost 10 minutes before I moved. The manila envelope lay quiet on the passenger seat, quiet the way a loaded gun is quiet. I hadn't sealed it yet. I wanted Geneva to see the weight of what she'd ignored. Inside were 3 items. The original will signed by Mavis, a notarized record of Calden's forged power of attorney, and a formal cease and desist letter with every date and timestamp I could prove. I didn't put any emotion into the folder, just truth. Let her explain that away. Her house stood proud, just as I remembered. White brick. Tall hedges. A door too expensive for the neighborhood it tried to impress. She always said legacy should be visible from the curb. I parked at the edge of the driveway and walked the rest of the way. Slowly. Deliberately. She answered the door in silk and pearls. Her hair was set, her perfume sweet, like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong in her house. "Beatrice," she said, voice thick with performance, "you didn't call." I handed her the folder. "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to deliver a message, legally." She didn't take it right away. Her hand hovered, the smile faltered. "Are you threatening your own mother?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm warning the woman who forged my name." Her face cracked. Just for a second. A flicker of truth blinked in her eyes before the mask slid back into place. She stepped aside and gestured me in. "At least don't make a scene on the porch." The hallway hadn't changed. Same family photos. Same curated scent. She poured herself a glass of water from the crystal decanter. "No offer for me. Not that I wanted one." "I don't think you understand what's at stake," she said, seating herself like a queen surveying a peasant. "If Calden falls, so does everything we've built." "You didn't build anything," I said. "You redirected inheritance. That's not construction." That's misappropriation. Her voice dropped. I did what I had to do. No, I replied. You did what you thought you could get away with. I opened the folder, spread the papers on her coffee table. This is what I've done. From this point on, I record everything. Every call. Every visit. Every lie. She sipped her water, slow and smug. What are you hoping to gain? Some twisted sense of justice? You'll lose everything. I stood up. No. I already lost everything. What I'm doing now is recovery. I didn't look back when I walked out. I heard the soft clink of her glass hitting the tabletop behind me, more fragile than I remembered. In the car, my hands were cold. I turned on the heater and sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like my grandmother more than I wanted to admit, same lines around the mouth, same eyes that watched too much and said too little. I wasn't just warning them, I whispered to myself. I was warning me. That I'm not going back. That night, the message came in. A text. Calden's number. You made your choice. Don't be surprised when we make ours. Attached was a photo from one of my security cameras. Blurry. Black and white. A figure standing just outside my gate. I leaned closer. The image was grainy, but it wasn't Geneva. It wasn't Calden either. It was someone in a hooded jacket, just standing. Watching. They weren't done with me. They were circling. I didn't reply. I just added the image to the folder marked evidence. Later that night, I walked my property line with a flashlight in one hand and a quiet prayer in the other. The ground was soft from rain, but my steps were steady. I checked every gate, every latch. Reset the motion lights. Locked the windows twice. Inside, I stood in the hallway and touched the wall where Mavis used to hang her favorite painting. It wasn't there anymore, Geneva had taken it after the funeral. Said it belonged with the rest of the family estate. They wanted the house but not the heart inside it. That was the difference. I went to my desk and opened the will again. Not because I needed to see it, but because I needed to remind myself why I wasn't folding. They built a story around me, helpless daughter, bitter outcast, unstable woman. But the paper didn't lie. Neither did the dates, or the signatures, or the trail of silent theft they left behind. They didn't expect me to keep records. They expected me to disappear. I lit a candle and placed it near the window. Grandma used to say that light was more than safety, it was declaration. I'm here. I see you. I won't vanish quietly. The next morning, I got a call from a neighbor. Saw someone pacing outside your place last night, he said. Didn't seem like they belonged. They don't, I told him. But they will keep trying. He offered to walk the property line with me the next night. I thanked him, not because I was afraid, but because it felt good to be seen by someone who wasn't pretending I didn't exist. Quietly, slowly, gently. The neighborhood was noticing. The story was shifting. Geneva didn't know how to fight a story she didn't control. And that's what frightened her most. You can only warn a predator once. The next time, you become the hunter. I upgraded the locks before sunrise. Not out of fear, out of principle. Every bolt I installed was a promise to myself. I wasn't building a fortress to keep them out. I was building a boundary they would finally have to acknowledge. By noon, the cameras had been replaced, the footage backed up to 3 encrypted drives. Names. Timestamps. Delivery slips. Loan statements. All labeled and indexed. I even printed hard copies because something about holding paper felt more real than digital threats. I wasn't scared. I was sharpening. The neighborhood had begun to whisper. And not just about me. It started with a woman at the co-op asking why my name was used in a recent local fundraiser flyer. She said she assumed I'd reconciled with the family. I smiled gently, told her the truth. You can't reconcile with people who never considered you one of them. Then came the invite. An oversized, cream-colored envelope embossed in gold. Inside, a folded card. Slate Family Legacy Gala, honoring tradition, celebrating unity. I flipped it over. My name was listed as a confirmed patron sponsor. Underneath it, in smaller print. Beatrice Trent, founding contributor to the Slate Heritage Initiative. I nearly laughed. Founding contributor? I was the foundation, the one they paved over without asking. The event was held that weekend. I didn't go. I didn't need to. They live-streamed it. I watched from my couch, a mug of cold coffee in one hand and the remote in the other. Geneva took the stage in a silk suit the color of ashes. Her voice dripped with familiarity as she welcomed guests and declared the event a moment of generational healing. Calden stood beside her, solemn and tall, like he hadn't been siphoning funds from an estate he never owned. And now, Geneva smiled, the man continuing our family's proud legacy with the generous support of his sister, Beatrice Trent. Applause. My name echoed through that hall like it belonged there. They weren't just rewriting the past. They were selling it. That same evening, I received an email from one of my consulting partners. Subject, urgent, media inquiry. The message was short. We've received questions about your involvement with the Slate Heritage Trust. Please clarify. By Monday morning, 2 contracts were on hold. By Tuesday, 3 more were cancelled. And by Wednesday, the press release landed on my desk. Geneva's words, Calden's grin, my name printed beneath a headline that read, "A family reunited, the Slate legacy lives on." They didn't just steal my house. They stole my silence and wore it like approval. I stared at the screen and whispered, I built that heritage. You just used my quiet to rewrite it. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then I opened a new document. I titled it, Statement from Beatrice Trent. No bitterness. No accusations. Just facts. This legacy was constructed on forged documents, a concealed will, and the systematic erasure of truth. I did not consent to be part of this narrative. I am not affiliated with the Slate Heritage Initiative. And I will not stay quiet. I didn't name names. But the silence ended. By the next day, the Post had over 6,000 shares. Calden emailed me twice. Geneva called me 5 times. I didn't answer either. Not out of spite, but because I had nothing more to say in private. Instead, I went to the attic and pulled down the family portrait, the one I was erased from. I flipped it over and used a permanent marker to write my name on the back. Not for them. For me. They erased my name from paper. Not from history. The photo was crooked when I rehung it. I left it that way. That night, I turned off every light in the house except the one in the front room. I stood near the window, letting the glow spill into the yard. My phone buzzed just after midnight. A voicemail. Calden's voice. This could have been simple, B. But you always needed to be difficult. There was no rage in his tone. No desperation. Just annoyance, like someone inconvenienced by a boundary they thought they could cross freely. I played it again, slower this time. I checked the camera feeds. One still frame caught my breath mid-thought. A figure stood near the window, close. Too close. Not at the gate anymore. I saved the image. Added it to the file labeled Retaliation, Phase 2. The message was clear. They weren't fighting for truth. They were fighting for control. But the moment they used my name without my permission, they turned me into a weapon they couldn't recall. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window. I didn't look tired. I looked ready. Slowly. Gently. Quietly. I opened a second file, the one labeled Slate vs. Trent, and typed the date in the subject line. They woke the wrong legacy. They tried to bury me with legal ink. Now I was digging with fire. I sat at the kitchen table, the screen in front of me glowing faintly as Calden's voice played on loop. I replayed the voicemail twice, once at normal speed, then slowed down until I could catch every word, every smirk hidden beneath his tone. This could have been simple, B. But you always needed to be difficult. I forwarded the file to my attorney with the subject line, Exhibit A, Threat, Intent, Pattern. Then I opened the encrypted folder I'd been curating since this all began, every document, every notarized lie, every screenshot and voicemail and property record misfiled under my name. You used my silence like a safety net, I whispered. Let's see how well you fall without it. 3 hours later, I was in my attorney's office, across the desk from a man who had stopped blinking after the second affidavit. His associate, a woman younger than me but with the eyes of someone who'd seen too many paper trails end in ruin, kept her pen ready. I've reviewed everything you sent, he said, setting the final folder down with a soft thump. Forgery. Misuse of POA. Wire fraud. Identity theft. And that voicemail clinches intent. I didn't nod. I didn't blink either. We'll file this with the state attorney general by end of day, he added. Geneva and Calden aren't going to see this coming. I looked him square in the eye and said, "Good. I hope it hurts." He didn't smile. Just pressed his lips into a flat line and said, "It will." When I got back home, I made tea. Not because I needed the warmth, but because my hands wanted something to do that wasn't retaliation. The house felt calm, still, but my body didn't match it. I kept walking the perimeter, checking the windows, making sure every latch clicked just once, not twice. I didn't want to live in fear. I just didn't want to live in assumption. The next morning, the storm hit, not from the sky, but from the screen. Geneva called a press conference. I didn't attend. But I watched it, front row in my own living room, coffee cooling in my palm. She stood behind a podium outside a courthouse she didn't belong to, dressed in mourning black like someone had died and she hadn't decided whether to care. "My daughter Beatrice is troubled," she began, her tone a blend of exhaustion and martyrdom. "This campaign of delusion has brought undue pain to our family." I didn't flinch. I expected worse. She has fabricated documents. Imagined betrayals. She's always been emotionally fragile. My hand tightened around the mug. "And while we love her deeply, we must do what's best for the community." She pulled out a manila envelope, my new least favorite color, and waved it gently. "In here are handwritten notes from Mavis Dorn herself, clearly stating that her legacy was always meant for the family as a whole, not any one individual." The camera zoomed in. She didn't open the envelope. I whispered, "Because there's nothing in there you want people to see." She kept smiling. Smiling like a woman who believed her voice louder than mine. For a moment, it worked. Comments under the live stream teetered toward her favor. "Poor mother. Estranged daughter. Sad story." Until the leak. An anonymous Twitter account posted screenshots, Geneva Slate, in a group email thread, mocking BEA's emotional breakdowns, stating, "Let her cry. As long as she stays out of the way." Then a second post. A former employee from the Slate Foundation came forward anonymously. "I was told to shred a document with Beatrice's name on it. I refused. I kept a copy." They uploaded it. It was a financial disbursement form, one that should have included me. It was dated 3 months after Mavis passed. The tide shifted. Within an hour, Geneva's press conference was being stitched into satire clips. News outlets ran side-by-side comparisons of her claims and the documents. I didn't gloat. I didn't comment. Instead, I uploaded my own file, a notarized letter, sealed and timestamped by Mavis herself. "This property belongs to Beatrice Trent. I do not authorize any transfers after my death. Anyone who claims otherwise does so against my express instruction." No hashtags. No comments. Just the letter and a caption. Truth doesn't need a podium. Just a signature. By evening, I'd received 3 apology texts from former colleagues. 2 investors reinstated contracts. My attorney texted me a single word, momentum. I felt the shift, not like a wave, but like a crack in marble. That night, I let myself exhale. Just once. Then came the sound. A crash. My gate, metal, reinforced, clean, screamed against the front of a vehicle. I ran to the monitor. The live feed showed the front fence ripped open, tire tracks cutting across the lawn. I called the police. 20 minutes later, they arrived. I showed them the security footage, paused on the plate of a rental truck. It wasn't blurry. Reservation under, Calden Reese. I signed the report. Pressed full charges. Not because it would undo the damage, but because it was time for them to answer to someone besides me. I stood by the busted fence as they left, wind pressing against my coat. This wasn't just about a house. Or money. Or paper. This was about erasure, and the fire it leaves behind when you try to smother someone too long. Quietly, I whispered into the wind, "The law will speak next." And this time, I would be listening from the front row. The law would speak next. And I would be there, front row, no more looking away. The police didn't ask many questions. They had the footage, the plate, the damage. The officer with the clipboard nodded toward the splintered fence like it was just another Tuesday night in Asheville. "You'll want to file civil charges too," he said flatly. "Beyond the criminal complaint." I nodded. I didn't ask how long it would take. I'd stopped expecting speed from systems built to move slowly when women like me finally spoke up. The house looked hollow with the gate torn open. I stood barefoot on the porch, floodlights casting my shadow over the wreckage. My breath fogged in the cold night, but my voice, when I spoke to the officer, didn't waver. Make sure you mark the damage to the wiring too. The security line was cut. That wasn't an accident. He looked up. You think this was planned? I didn't blink. I know it was. He wrote without responding. They always write before they act. By morning, my attorney had filed for a cease and desist. Geneva and Calden were barred from contacting me, directly or indirectly. Every financial transaction involving my name, my address, or my social was frozen. The investigator forwarded our full report to the FBI. Cross-state banking violations. Estate fraud. Tampering with legal documents. And now, trespassing with malicious intent. You did everything right, my lawyer told me. You've built a record they can't undo. I thanked him quietly. Slowly. Gently. I let the words land between us like the beginning of something I hadn't dared believe in, protection. But legal victories don't come with silence. They come with noise. Backlash. Retaliation. The first headline dropped 2 days later. Slate Foundation loses major donor amid legal allegations. The donor didn't issue a statement. They just walked away. Geneva tried to contain it. She called an emergency board meeting, private, no press. What she didn't know was that one of the board members had started recording the minute she sat down. The leaked audio hit the internet that night. She was supposed to disappear. I handled it. Beatrice was nothing. She's just noise. Just static. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much at all. I listened to the clip on loop, not to feel anger, but to hear the relief in her voice when she said it. That's what stung. It had always been easier for her when I was quiet. Public backlash followed. The press turned. Comments flipped. Articles that once questioned my mental stability were now adding words like alleged forgery and credible complaint. Calden didn't take it well. He posted a video on his public feed. A single camera. Dim light. No shirt, for reasons only his ego understood. She thinks she's better than blood, he said into the lens. But she's not family anymore. She's a traitor. Always has been. The comments section turned against him faster than the lawyers could refresh the page. Grow up, Calden. You lost your inheritance. Don't act like she stole it. She has receipts. You have rants. I didn't respond. But I saved the video. Evidence isn't always clean. Sometimes, it's petty and self-incriminating. That evening, I stood at the gate they tried to destroy. The wood had been replaced. Not perfect. Still raw in places. The screws were too new, the grain didn't match. But it stood. I looked at the cars parked outside, news vans, unmarked sedans, neighborhood curiosity. Police cruisers idling with low beams casting long shadows over my lawn. And I stood there, tall in the center of everything they tried to unmake. They broke the wood, I said quietly. They didn't break the foundation. Inside, the house was dark. I turned off every light. I didn't want to be watched. I wanted to be alone, with her. I opened the locked drawer beneath the stairs. Inside was a letter I hadn't dared open since the funeral. The envelope was thin. The handwriting unmistakable. Beatrice, only when you're ready. My hands didn't shake this time. I slid my thumb beneath the flap and unfolded the single sheet of paper. If they ever come for what's yours, the letter began, don't just hold your ground. Reclaim it. She'd written it in blue ink, the loops of her words soft but strong. They will say you're too emotional. Too difficult. They'll say you imagined the erasure. But you didn't. I watched it begin, even before I left. A tear slipped quietly onto the page. I didn't wipe it away. You don't owe them grace, Beatrice. But you owe yourself peace. I pressed the paper to my chest and sat back, breathing slowly, letting her words sink into the silence like medicine. I whispered, I'm not finished. Not yet. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a second voice. Soft. Watchful. Not asking for anything. Just being there. I folded the letter, placed it in a new envelope, and labeled it, to be opened after the hearing. Then I picked up my court notice and slid it into my briefcase. The date was circled in red. The court date was set. But judgment had already begun. I hadn't touched the courtroom door in almost 15 years. The brass handle was cool under my fingers, familiar and solid, like an old acquaintance whose presence was as expected as it was unavoidable. I gripped it tightly, as if it were mine, something I had every right to hold on to. No hesitation, no doubt. I wasn't stepping into the hallway of someone who was begging to be heard, someone still struggling for acknowledgement. No, today, this was the threshold of someone who had come to make her voice impossible to ignore, whose truth would not be dismissed with a glance or a whisper. Outside, the reporters stood on the courthouse steps, their voices a low murmur rising and falling in waves. One of them called my name, tentatively at first, like a question hovering in the air, but then, more boldly, as if daring me to answer. I didn't look up. Their curiosity wasn't for me, it was for the spectacle they imagined. I wasn't here for their questions. I wasn't here to explain myself or tell my story for them to spin. No, I was here for something far more definitive, answers. And I would get them the only way I knew how, through law, through ink, through evidence that was so detailed, so undeniable, it couldn't be misinterpreted or manipulated. The courtroom was colder than I remembered, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the sunlight outside. The air conditioning hummed loudly, and the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Geneva and Calden were already seated at their table, their expressions grave, their bodies stiff in the kind of formal attire that spoke of years spent pretending to hold up a crumbling empire. Their attorney, a slick man with a smile that was too white, too perfect, whispered to them like he was guiding them through a game of delay and damage control, as if this was all a strategy to be won, a contest of willpower rather than justice. I took my seat across the aisle, no entourage, no family for support, just me, and the 3 folders that sat on the table in front of me. They looked deceptively thin, but I knew the weight they carried, not just in paper, but in truth. The judge entered, his robe sweeping across the floor, and the room fell silent. Papers rustled, chairs creaked, and the proceedings began. I placed the first file on the desk, the one marked with bold letters, Mavis's original will. Not the falsified copy that Geneva had paid someone to sneak through probate, the one that had been amended and altered in ways only a greedy mind could conceive. No. This was the original, notarized version, the one Mavis had written herself. I laid it down with the same reverence one might give to a religious text. Beneath it, I stacked the next file, 10 years' worth of property tax records, every payment made from my account, every financial step I had taken to ensure the home was mine, not theirs. The final piece in the stack was a USB drive, the one containing the leaked recording from that fateful boardroom meeting. Geneva's voice cut through the quiet as it played over the speakers, not as composed or refined as it had once sounded in the halls of her power. She was supposed to disappear. I handled it. Beatrice was nothing. The judge flipped through the documents with methodical precision, his fingers lingering over dates and signatures. I watched him as he turned each page, his face impassive, his eyes focused on the evidence. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was already laid out before him. A part of me, the part that had been silenced for years, whispered under my breath, so softly that only I could hear it, they didn't just come after my home. They came after my name. And now? Now, I give it back to them, engraved in evidence. The silence that followed felt heavy. Geneva's lawyer stood up, his tie slightly askew, a bead of sweat forming on his upper lip as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. Your Honor, he began, his voice smoother than I felt he had earned. There is no conclusive proof that Ms. Trent was ever intended to be the sole heir to Mrs. Dorn's estate. Emotional ties don't equate to legal ownership. I stood, slowly and without hesitation. I didn't feel anger, but I did feel something, a quiet, steady confidence that radiated through my words. Your Honor, the only reason they forged documents is because they knew I was the rightful heir. A hush fell over the room. A deep silence, the kind that stretched too long, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for the next move. And then, as if to break it, Calden stood up suddenly, his fists clenched tightly by his sides, his face red with anger. She's lying, he shouted, his voice thick with rage. She's unstable. She made all of this up because she can't stand not being the favorite. The judge's gavel banged against the wood sharply. Mr. Reese, sit down. Calden opened his mouth again to protest, but Geneva's hand shot out and clamped around his wrist, her eyes frantic, her fingers tightening in a way that told me she was just as scared as she was angry. Sit. She hissed the word through clenched teeth. The silence returned to the room, thick and suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. We all knew, deep down, that the weight of the moment had shifted. Before the break, the judge paused, glancing toward the bailiff, who handed him a sealed envelope. His brow furrowed as he read the contents, the lines of his face deepening with each line he scanned. Finally, he looked up, his voice quiet but firm as he addressed the court. "These are federal charges." He paused, letting the words land. "Wire fraud. Misuse of nonprofit funds. Identity theft. Delivered by the FBI." I saw Geneva's face drain of color. She looked as if the air had been sucked out of the room, her body freezing in place. Calden turned pale, his mouth opening and closing like a man realizing too late that the storm he had thought he outran had circled back to claim him. Geneva whispered something to her lawyer, her eyes darting nervously toward the door, but she didn't move. Calden, however, did. He stood, his jacket tugged out of place as he tried to collect himself, his voice cracking as he shouted, "This is nonsense. This is political." The bailiff stepped forward, his voice stern. "Mr. Reese, you are to remain seated." For once, Calden listened. I didn't stay for the sentencing phase. There was nothing more to prove. Instead, I walked out of the courtroom, out into the daylight, and didn't speak to the reporters. They swarmed around me, mics thrust out, cameras clicking and whirring. One of them asked, "Beatrice, do you have anything to say to your family?" I paused, just for a moment, enough to let the question sink in. Then I turned slightly, enough to be heard but not to look back. I knew they were watching. I knew they would hear my words, but they would never understand. They knew who I was. They just thought the world wouldn't believe me. And that was all I had to say. When I returned to the house, I saw the new gate halfway installed. It was stronger, taller, and painted a deep stain that was a shade darker than the one they had splintered. The workers, their faces red with sweat, nodded at me as I approached. One of them wiped his brow and smiled. "Ma'am," he said kindly. "We saved the old pieces, in case you wanted them." I turned to see them stacked near the porch, bent, broken, jagged. The fragments of a gate that had once kept me contained, kept me in a place I had to fight for, a place they thought they could take from me. I knelt down, picked up one of the shards. It was lighter now, stripped of its force, dried by time and weather. The crack ran deep through it, jagged and sharp. I ran my fingers along it, letting the splinters poke at my skin, but it didn't hurt. It wasn't sharp in the way I feared. "Let this be the last thing they broke," I whispered. And then, I stood. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I simply stood, in the home that no longer needed defending. This house didn't need protection anymore. It had been reclaimed. Forgiveness wasn't something I was required to offer. But peace? That was a choice, one that only I could make for myself. The front steps were damp with the early morning dew as I stood there, my bare feet pressing gently into the cool wood. I let the air move past my shoulders, feeling the soft breeze stir the leaves of the oaks lining the path. It was the kind of morning that asked nothing of you, only that you exist in it, and let it be. The air moved gently, lifting the edge of my sweater like a hand that either offered to guide me forward, or let me go, if I chose. There was something in the stillness, something deeply comforting. It didn't demand answers. It didn't demand anything at all. Inside the house, the atmosphere had changed. It didn't feel empty, not in the way I might have expected it to, but it was aware. Aware of its own quiet, almost like it had taken a deep breath after holding too much for too long. The wood floors, those old floors that had carried the weight of my childhood and all the things that followed, had settled again. The scent of lemon oil lingered faintly on the banister. I ran my fingers over it as I passed, instinctively. A small habit from childhood. It wasn't hesitation I felt, just familiarity. I walked past the hallway, each step echoing softly in the house that had become both sanctuary and battleground. I made my way to my grandmother's desk. The letter from her was already open on the surface. I had read it countless times before, but I didn't need to read it again today. The words were etched in my mind now, but I still placed it neatly in front of me, aligning it with the grain of the wood. Then, with steady hands, I pulled out fresh stationery, cream-colored, thick stock, the kind Mavis would have approved of. I smiled to myself at the thought, as if she were there beside me, nodding her approval. And I began to write. Not because I expected anyone to ever read it. Not even because I hoped it would ever be seen. But because I needed to say something back. I needed to reply, in my own way. Dear Mavis. They tried to take everything, but you gave me just enough. I didn't win, not in the way the world measures winning. But I didn't lose. I stayed standing. I spoke when silence was easier. I didn't scream. I spoke. And that was enough. You believed in me when I didn't know I'd need the memory of that belief this long. Thank you. For the house. For the truth. For the paper trail you left behind like breadcrumbs when you knew they'd try to burn the forest down. I signed it with my name, Beatrice, and folded it carefully, aligning the edges. I sealed the envelope with a gentle press, and slid it into the drawer beneath her original will. It wasn't meant to be sent. It wasn't meant for anyone else to see. It was just meaning. A moment of clarity. Outside, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, its light beginning to touch the edge of the porch swing. I sat there, a blanket draped over my lap, rocking slowly back and forth. The tea in my hand was warm, and as I sipped, I let time do what it does best, remind us that we're still here. We're still breathing. Geneva never called. Neither did Calden. From what I gathered through whispers and news snippets, Geneva had been placed under house arrest. The Slate Foundation was formally dissolved within weeks. Its once pristine website now redirected to a government seizure notice. Calden, on the other hand, had vanished. Fled. Rumors said he left the state, looking for somewhere, anywhere, that didn't have extradition laws. There were murmurs about a plea deal. Some said he was already cooperating with federal agents, but I didn't feel the need to follow up. It didn't matter. It didn't change anything. No one asked how I felt about it. And I didn't offer. They hadn't apologized. Not to me. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. Some debts don't get paid in words. Some wounds don't close because someone finally says, sorry. They close because you stop expecting the ones who broke you to stitch you back together. You stop needing them to. Later that afternoon, I walked through the hallway again. I paused near the gallery wall, my eyes lingering on the framed photograph of my younger self, reframed. I had taken it from a box Geneva left behind, thinking she still owned everything here. The girl in the picture wore blue. Her bangs were crooked, one knee scraped and scabbed. She was laughing at something outside the frame, probably Mavis, probably at some silly joke only they shared. I stared at her for a long time. It doesn't erase the erasure, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. But it's mine now. That weekend, I drove to the cemetery. I brought with me a single item, nothing grand, nothing overly symbolic, just a piece of the broken gate. The wood had been split, but it had been sanded down at the edges, made smooth now, no longer a weapon. Just a piece of memory that was manageable. I placed it at the base of Mavis's headstone, beside a fresh sprig of rosemary. It wasn't an offering. It wasn't a tribute. It was simply remembrance. For remembrance, I said softly, almost to myself. The breeze answered. It moved past me, brushing my cheek gently, like the breath of something long gone, something familiar, something steady. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. On the way back, I played a song Mavis used to hum when she baked. I sang along quietly, my voice off-key, but steady, holding the tune like an old friend. The words came as naturally as the melody, the kind of song that had carried her through long afternoons in the kitchen, the scent of flour and warmth filling the air. Peace doesn't come with a fanfare. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets or a grand procession. It arrives softly, in the quietest of steps. Back at the house, I made tea. Chamomile. Always Mavis's favorite. The window above the sink looked out to the street where a new mailbox stood tall, gleaming in the light. The metal was still too bright, but my name, was etched clearly into its side. Beatrice Trent. Not Slate. Not Reese. Just me. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on the towel and walked to the door. A courier stood there, nodding politely. Delivery. No return address. I took the envelope, nodded back, and closed the door behind me. Inside was a single slip of paper. No signature. No threats. No apology. Just one sentence. You were right. I stared at the words for a long moment, letting the weight, or the lack of it, settle into my palm. Then, without a word, I walked to the fireplace. I dropped the paper into the flames. It curled, blackened, and disintegrated, the smoke rising slowly into the air. Not in rage. Not in triumph. Just in release. I stood quietly, watching the fire, letting the silence wrap around me, not to muffle anything, but to give room for whatever came next. I had never been meant to win the favor of my family. I had been meant to survive it. Sometimes survival doesn't mean winning. It means refusing to vanish. If you've ever been erased from your own story, if you've ever had to fight to write your name back in, this one was for you. What would you have done if your family tried to take everything? Tell me below. I read every comment. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. More truths are coming. And not all of them will be easy to hear.